Good morning. We've been having some beautiful weather, clearest days, mountains without a cloud on them, just pleasant. It does still get hotter in the afternoons, but incredible blue sky, green mountains. It's good to be alive. Yeah. I wanted to share today a little bit about my own path, my own inquiry. And I've talked about it before, but I think it bears discussing today, at least to the point of the topic of today's sharing. There's dear friends I have in Taiwan who've pretty much adopted me since I first met them 17, 18 years ago. And they've taken me in. They've helped me find places when I needed new places, when my teaching career would change from one university, 4.5 years in Hue at the university there, and then another 9 or 10 years in Geelong, Haiyang Dasui, teaching. And each time, in fact, they always help me find my place, help me get settled in. Really amazing family that I have here, my adopted Taiwan family. And they found a teacher. And I shared, they always knew that I was into meditation and that I've had a lot of experience traveling around the world, meeting some different teachers, and never having found my teacher, someone who resonated. Beautiful spiritual people everywhere around the world. But and a lot of fun adventures with a spiritual nature, because it's been my motivation since 5 or 6 years old is when I first, actually earlier than that, I was asking questions of my mother that were quite esoteric. I was a metaphysical little dude, much to her amusement and puzzlement. But she, in her way, always nurtured and encouraged these pursuits and questions. She was quite the mother. Anyway, my friends here in Taiwan had found a teacher that Chan, Zen, Chinese Zen, Chan, teacher, who they really got involved with and joined his quite large groups of devotees. And they encouraged me, spent a year encouraging me to come. They even said, "Hey, we met your teacher for you." And I said, "No, you've met your teacher for you, but thanks for sharing. I'm okay, I'm doing all right. I seem to be my lot in life to be a lone ranger and not join any group." Well, after a year, I listened, and some events leading up to me being more receptive to at least wanting to meet him. And at the time, I guess 6 years ago. At that time, the group hadn't had much experience with foreigners. The teacher spoke only Chinese, no English. But luckily for me, I had my adopted Taiwan family to guide me through, and I found within the group many English speakers. The group as a whole is quite educated, quite worldly, experienced travelers, experienced business people, experienced professionals. It's pretty impressive, the group. And it numbered in the tens of thousands. And they didn't have a real process to what to do with a foreigner, how to introduce the studies and their teacher, how to introduce him to a foreigner. So I've had a lot of experience of being the first and only. Yeah. In fact, I spent most of my life in places where, indeed, I was the only foreigner. And somehow gravitated and felt comfortable in these circumstances. But very used to being a guinea pig. And again, for Chinese-speaking people, they had a process in place. You do this, and then after you do all these things, then you can go to the master class, the meditation class, where the teacher will be there. And quite a hierarchical structure, quite a structure they developed around this man. And I was to find that he was a micromanager. He was concerned, he was involved in every single detail in this elaborate structure. And I have to say that this structure lent itself to Asian sensibilities, particularly Chinese sensibilities, that they found they liked. Well, they're inventors of bureaucracy after all, and they certainly mastered it, but they feel quite comfortable when they know their position, their place in the structure, in the hierarchy of the structure. They're uncomfortable not knowing. And again, here I am. What to do with me? So I went to a couple, they call introductory class, where talking ad nauseum, talking in Chinese, which I have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. Very, very short, 5 to 10 minute, 2 hour to 3 hour class with 2 5 to 10 minute brief meditations. And I enjoyed the meditations, and I already had a meditation practice that I was at least sitting an hour daily and had for many years. So felt comfortable for the 2 short, but I tell you, the talking just wore me out. And I did that a couple times. And at this stage in my life, I wasn't a particularly patient man, passionate man, but patience was something I needed to work on, to say the least. And finally, after a couple times of going through that, I finally said, why don't you just let me see him. I sit in the back, way in the top, in the back, farthest from the room, and I will know immediately if he is my teacher or not. I don't need to know what he's saying. I just have to have a chance to feel him, to see if he comes here. So my friends knew me quite well, but at this point, and they knew that I wouldn't come, that I was losing interest in pursuing their group. So they arranged for me to have a meeting with I didn't know about that, with the number 2 lady. She's the teacher's right hand. And we sat in a small little room, tiny room, with 4 or 5 people, someone to translate. In fact, one of my friends to translate. And she sat and looked at me, and I guess it's interesting because we're checking each other out at the same time. I'm trying to feel what she's all about, trying to see what she's all about, and she's very curious about me. So they shared some of my background, how many years, and the time I spent in Japan in a Zen dojo, a Zen temple, Renzai Zen. And she finally asked a question in Chinese, because she as well didn't have English language ability. And she asked me, what is Zen? And without missing a beat, and never having really thought of it before, it's in a short sense. I could give a long, drawn-out talk about it, but the words came out, the quickest way home. And she quickly got up, went out of the room, and I was thinking, oh, what did I say? And she came back with the teacher. And at that time, in this small, they're very protective of him. And so to have a chance to meet him, of course at the time, I didn't really appreciate, I didn't really realize until I would spend some time in the organization that how rare this opportunity was. And there was the man himself sitting there. And I remember just chuckling, just laughing for no reason, no apparent reason. And he laughed too. And here we were, both older guys, in a very innocent, childish state of just laughing, of just being together. And incredible experience, I think, for both of us, because there was some kind of recognition too. We recognize each other. And that's basically what I took away from the first encounter with the man who was to become, for a period of time, my teacher. And as he needed to prepare meditation, the group session was to begin shortly. So I was hustled out of the room, brought to the second row of this huge auditorium, given a purple shirt because they all wore the same shirt. They like uniforms here, I guess, much more than Westerners do. They like to be readily identifiable. And there's a comfort for them in a group. So I had this purple shirt, and I like purple. It had some cool Chinese tachan and some cool characters on the shirt. So it was nice shirt. Remember pulling it over whatever I was wearing. And that was my first class. And I stayed with this class, with this teacher, for about 5 years, until I went back to my own study. Not rejecting the teacher, loving him because he helped me a lot. But I always knew that my own liberation, my own unity, my own recognition of what's so was up to me. So he had taken me to the edge of the precipice, the cliff, and said, jump. And I didn't hesitate. I just jumped. And I really appreciated his role in my journey. His role was to point. His role was to bring me to the cliff. And from there, I was on my own. So the quickest way home is to jump off the cliff. Just plunge fearlessly. And this lack of fear comes from the understanding that what we are, all of us together, is a unified, non-divided, non-separated consciousness. So that everything that we saw around us, we were a part of. Sometimes I would say, everything around me is a part of me, but that seems a little self-centered sometimes. So I prefer to look at it as that I'm part of everything around me. So its fear disappears, because the primary fear, of course, is the fear of death. But once you truly understand, once you realize, once you awaken to the universality, the wholeness, the continuity, life goes backwards in an infinite direction, and it goes forward in an infinite direction. And I like to add, we're always on a spiral. It's not just a linear, because this is fourth dimensional. Height, width, length, and the time continuum, becoming space-time continuum, 4 dimensions that we're spiraling through at awesome velocities. So, I had begun my early part of my journey with more or less Vedanta, Hindu philosophy. My first real, I think 11 or 12, I took the autobiography of a yogi, the story of the first yogi that journeyed to the West and spent his life in the West, Parahamsa Yogananda, the founder of the Self-Realization Foundation. And he really resonated with me, even though at that time he's already passed on. He passed on in 1952, and I was 4 years old at the time. So he was my first teacher, even though he didn't occupy, at least that I knew of, a physical body. And I doubt that he did, because he had fulfilled his samsara. He had fulfilled his destiny. He was free to go on to the higher realms. But his book really resonated with me, and I found myself really drawn to Hinduism. And in my way of not joining anything, I guess I was a Hindu with a little h. And I remember sticking with it up till university time, when I was able to study a lot of Indian philosophy. Great University of Hawaii had a great professor from India who really opened my eyes to the studies of the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Indian philosophy, the Bhagavad Gita really resonated with me, with Vishnu and Arjuna. Great, beautiful book, still one of my favorites. But somewhere in the course of studying Indian philosophy, of all things, I got interested in Zazen, the Japanese expression of Zen, and got deeper and deeper, and started, as I mentioned, a Raja Yoga plan of strict discipline, sitting straight, being concerned of the physical form, of sitting straight. And in Rinzai Zen was the Zen of the samurai. And the discipline. I remember a teacher telling me, when you meditate, you should sweat. It's if you're doing battle. You have to be vigilant. You have to sit straight. In the old days, if you weren't straight, they'd hit you with a stick. Now it's a metaphorical stick. Sit up straight, or I'll hit you with the stick. A practice of kendo, archery, kyushu, jiu-jitsu or judo, some form of hand-to-hand combat. All these were stressed. But so was Cha Dao, the tea ceremony, and Ikebana, Japanese, flower arranging. Because the adept samurai will be a master of the three, of his martial art, of the very critical Cha Dao, the tea ceremony, and Ikebana, flower arranging, which gave you a chance to really practice your patience. So I was involved and fascinated by the three, all three. But this rigorous Raja Yoga, the reward for this diligent practice would be clarity, which comes from mastering the mind, which is hard work. And at some point, I began to question, as I was unable to experience this clarity that came from completely silencing the mind. My monkey mind was always going, and any attempt to, I could still it, I could quiet it, but I certainly couldn't silence it. So this elusive reward of clarity escaped me. And I began to question, as I always do, inquiry, this process. My mind was a tool, always a tool for me. And I used it not to make decisions, not to do anything, but to review, to contemplate. My mind helped me eliminate that which is not so. And trust me, in our lives, there's a lot more that's not so. We're a bundle of not so-ness. And seldom are able to recognize what's so. And again, like the koans that were part of Renzai Zen that I appreciated, this was a puzzle not to be solved, resolved by the mind. So it's a process of taming the mind, learning to see that the answers would never come from the mind. But I recognize that as a tool. And really the only available tool. I had this vehicle, and I could practice physicality of Zen, which is very rigorous. But I didn't know how much closer it would get me. Sorry, I've been to choke trying to stop that, and that's not good. But a little frustrated after 30 rigorous years of Zen, what I thought was Zen, to my understanding. And started with the mind. When I recognized the value, I thought, oh, the paradox of giving this fine tool. And in my case, it certainly is a fine tool. We're given this and then we're told to silence it, quiet it, ignore it, and we're rewarded with clarity, the ability to see things as they are. Well, that combined with the ravages of time, the passages of time, I began to relax. I began to give myself a break. I started needing to sit in a chair instead of in the half lotus, and sometimes full lotus posture on a cushion on the floor. I started to sit in a chair, never having very good posture. I just felt relaxed. I put down that heavy bag of shit that we all carry and felt immensely lighter. So I cut myself a break, and my reward was equanimity. I always remained in the same level of emotional and mental conditions. Good times, bad times, matters not. And this was my reward for letting go. And I was really resonating with the Buddha's story of all his rigorous, at this point, it really hit home, of all his rigorous efforts, far more rigorous than mine, as history tells us. When he gave up, and I think gave up is not very good description. Let go is so much better. Even saying it, let it go. Let it go. And then he awoke. And in my way, this is what I experienced. Letting go. And in the recent months, you can listen and see some of my sharings about silence and a new understanding, and being rewarded with brief glimpses of clarity. So Zen being the quickest way home, with almost 40 years of practice as I sit here today. The quickest way home just doesn't seem all that quick. But there's no pressure. All things have a time. Everything will unfold when it's meant to. This is what happened to me when I let go. All things will come to each and every one when the timing is correct.